Welcome to The Explainer. So, if you're a fan of middle-grade fantasy, you know the drill, right? A kid discovers they have some kind of incredible magical powers. They get whisked away to a secret boarding school or a hidden dimension, and they leave their ordinary, boring life completely behind. But what happens when a story takes all of those comfortable, established rules and just completely flips them upside down? Well, today we're diving into John Coley's really fascinating novel, The Bookworm. We're going to deconstruct exactly how this story subverts almost everything we expect from the genre, focusing on one big question. How is The Bookworm different from most middle-grade fantasy adventures? To really get to the heart of how different it is, we have to start right here. How does a kid who was just fighting dragons in the woods make it home in time for family dinner? I mean, this is the fundamental absurdity and honestly, the brilliant hook of The Bookworm. We're talking about a protagonist who is literally dodging the fiery breath of a massive, scaly beast in the morning, but is still deeply, deeply stressed out about avoiding awkward small talk with his parents over a plate of vegetables that same evening. It's this incredible, almost jarring juxtaposition of epic, life-or-death fantasy layered right on top of the mundane reality of middle school.
Here's our roadmap for breaking this down today. First, subverting the chosen one. 2, the magic of literacy. 3, invisible battles, real stakes. 4, order versus chaos. And finally 5, a new kind of hero. Let's jump right into section 1, subverting the chosen one. Brian's mundane reality.
So our protagonist is a 5th grader named Brian, and from page 1, his introduction totally defies that classic Compellian hero's journey. You know the typical chosen one, right? Orphaned royalty, destined for cosmic greatness, probably wielding some kind of glowing legendary sword. Yeah, Brian's reality is the exact opposite. He's an anxious kid at a private school on an academic scholarship. He deliberately takes a longer route to school just because he has this irrational fear of crossing a local footbridge. His biggest struggle isn't pulling a sword from a stone, it's navigating the mental traffic jam of talking to his own parents.
When you lay out Brian's daily schedule, it is wild. At 8 a.m., he's out in the woods, dodging a terrifying fire-belching dragon that's just recklessly knocking down trees. Fast forward to 10 a.m., and he's sitting in his literature class, completely exhausted, just trying to figure out his quirky new substitute teacher, Mr. Dyer. By 6 p.m., he's at the kitchen table eating dinner, giving his parents the classic, "my day was fine" routine. It really hammers home how bizarre his life is. He's engaging in Mortal Kombat, sure, but hearing the tardy bell ring at school, that still gives him a massive panic attack.
Moving on to section 2, the magic of literacy, words as weapons.
This is where the story gets super creative, because it reimagines the mechanics of magic entirely around reading. We actually need to redefine our core term here. In this universe, a bookworm isn't just an avid reader or a kid hiding out in the library. A true bookworm is an ancient magical defender. They study literature, especially the classics, not to get an A in class, but to actively combat chaotic, otherworldly forces trying to invade our reality. It's such a satisfying aha moment in the book. It takes this everyday, slightly nerdy label and turns into an ancient, noble calling.
To understand how this works, Brian's mentor, Mr. Dyer, drops this absolute bombshell of a secret. He says, "Writers tell the stories, but these are actually spells reinforcing the walls. We are the last vestiges of magical people on this side." Basically, authors, often completely by accident, are weaving literal spells when they create stories, and those literary spells act as a barrier holding back the darkness. In this world, literature is literal magic.
Think about standard magic for a second. It's usually wands, shouted incantations, or, being born into some secret elite magical bloodline. But the bookworm's magic? It's powered by intellectual curiosity. You prep your mind by reading an ancient first edition epic poem. You learn to sense the firmament, which is this glowing golden magical dust. And then you physically use your environment to seal the doorways to chaos. The mechanics here are entirely tied to intellect and literary appreciation, rather than buying a magic artifact in some hidden alleyway. All right, section 3, invisible battles, real stakes, the fear of madness. As awesome as that magic system is, it introduces this intense psychological tension that revolves around one huge problem. What happens when the magic is completely invisible to everyone else? Think about how lonely that is for Brian. He fights a massive dragon that torches a tree. Later, he battles a giant, foul-smelling ogre that literally smashes his living room mantle. But to his parents? There's no broken mantle, the living room is fine. Out in the woods, there's just a slightly charged stump. Nobody else can see the monsters or the golden magical dust. And that leads us to the real emotional anchor of the whole story. There's a line in the book, One day, he would have to cross that old bridge. He didn't want to end up like his Uncle Chadwick, afraid of his own shadow. See, Brian's ultimate fear isn't actually being eaten by a monster. It's a desperate, horribly grounded fear of mental illness. His Uncle Chadwick is institutionalized because he paints these chaotic pictures and rants about otherworldly dark phantoms. The exact same phantoms Brian is now seeing. So every single time Brian faces a monster, he is terrified that he's just losing his mind, exactly like his uncle.
So the stakes break down like this, and they are so unique for a middle grade book. First off, the monsters are completely invisible to regular people. Second, the battles are happening in this overlapped space and time. Third, and this part is crazy, because of that space-time disorientation, if someone watches Brian win a fight, it just looks like he fainted or fell asleep. When he gets engulfed in dragonfire in the chaotic realm, he wakes up screaming in his normal literature class, and his classmates just think he had a bad nap. And finally, the true danger isn't just getting killed, it's the psychological toll. The real terror is looking crazy to the people who love you.
Let's look at Section 4, Order versus Chaos, the Cosmic Lore. Now, despite the fact that this all happens in Brian's totally mundane neighborhood, the world building gives these invisible fights some serious universal importance. There are two terms you really need to know to understand the rules here. First is the Abzu. It's an ancient Sumerian term for the abyss of chaos, which is basically the realm where all the magic and monsters got banished ages ago. Second is the firmament. If you see this glowing golden magical dust floating around, it means there's a breach between our world of order and the Abzu. It's basically the flashing warning light that chaos is breaking through. Mr. Dyer actually explains this conflict using the Taoist concept of yin and yang, order and chaos. But the thing is, the balance is unstable. Chaos is aggressively and constantly trying to smash its way into the realm of order. To pull this off, these violent monsters anchor themselves to normal, real-world spots, like a patch of trees or that creepy old footbridge. But the absolute worst threats aren't even the mindless beasts. They're sentient chaos agents who actively hunt down bookworms. For a middle-grade book, it taps into some really deep philosophical stuff about balance.
Which brings us to my absolute favorite part. This incredibly empowering metaphor that sums up the whole magic system. Authors build the walls, bookworms defend the doors. The writers, just by creating stories, maintain the massive spell keeping chaos out, but walls have weak points, right? Doorways. And it's up to the readers, the bookworms, to literally stand at those doors and hold them shut.
And that leads us to our final part, Section 5, a new kind of hero, defending the mundane. Let's bring this all back to Brian, because the way he fights totally throws traditional fantasy tropes out the window. When he finally squares off against his ultimate fear, the troll at the footbridge, he doesn't blast it with a fireball, no. First, he senses the golden firmament. Second, he deliberately steps out of our world and into the Abzu to engage it. Third, he actually uses his brain and basic physics. He ducks, using the troll's massive inertia and momentum to send it flying backward through the doorway into the abyss. And fourth, the doorway snaps shut and he returns to the real world. He's dealing with sickening vertigo, he's totally drained, but he won. And this right here is the ultimate subversion of the genre. The answer to our big question today. A typical fantasy hero leaves the boring, mundane world behind to go save some distant magical kingdom, right? They get to escape. Brian doesn't escape to Hogwarts or Narnia. He stays right there in the mundane world. Why does he fight the troll at the footbridge? Not for glory, but because he realizes the troll has been maliciously tripping up little kids and capsizing canoes for years. Brian protects his own literal backyard out of pure indignation and responsibility for his actual neighborhood. It beautifully distills the core lesson of the story. True bravery isn't about swinging a magical sword around, it's about facing your deepest fears so that others don't have to. Brian goes to that footbridge knowing full well he might get hurt, or worse, that he might actually be losing his mind like his uncle, but he does it anyway, because if he doesn't, someone else in his community is going to suffer. So we've seen how the Bookworm brilliantly takes the classic middle-grade fantasy tropes, flips them, and grounds them in very real-world anxieties, all while making the simple act of reading a literal superpower. I want to leave you with this final, kind of provocative thought. As Mr. Dyer points out, sometimes a falling piano is just fate, but sometimes it's the chaotic realm trying to intrude. So, if unexplained chaos in our world is just magic trying to break through, who are the bookworms defending your neighborhood? Next time you see a quiet kid with their nose buried in a classic novel, you just might be looking at the person keeping the darkness at bay. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and hey, keep your eyes peeled for the firmament.